Welcome, everyone. I'm Jason Shulman, and I feel very grateful that we have time today on Valentine's Day to discuss things of the heart, such as awakening and enlightenment, both of which circle the heart and are about the heart, actually. So, in order to give as many people as possible time to ask questions and engage in discussion, I'm just going to make some remarks that I jotted down for a couple of minutes, and then I'm going to bring in my friend Tim Rothschild so we can further the discussion. And then all along, the stream will be open for your questions and comments, and I hope that you feel free to really ask questions about this topic. The spiritual path, although it's often glamorized in so many ways and has been throughout history, is really ultimately very simple. It's really learning to be who you are when you are not a slave to any ideas that you or other people have about the way a person who's living an awakening life should be. We all start out with everything that we need to be on the spiritual path. The equipment that we need is, I wrote my list, knowing your hopes, your dreams, your dissatisfactions, your suffering, and your own desire not to suffer. As long as we are in touch with stuff like that, we are on the spiritual path. Just the act of being aware of those things as important aspects of our human life means you're already on the spiritual path. So those are the principal tools for us attempting to live a life that's aware, awakening, a journey of healing our souls, which is really what the journey of awakening is about. The end of this particular quest is nothing special. It's living a fully human life, but with our eyes open and our heart open. And I guess that's the special part of it. And through this work, we begin to see the connectedness that we have to all of creation around us. And we get the opportunity in a multitude of ways to help others. Now, along the way, along this path of healing and awakening and enlightening, our values change. And that's principally what I want to mention in this short introduction. Our values change, and things that we considered worthless become worthy and filled with value. In fact, of paramount importance, and sometimes our principal allies on our journey. One of these things that we consider worthless or something that should be avoided, that becomes very important for us and is really auspicious to talk about on Valentine's Day, is a broken heart. My understanding is that we all need to taste the broken heart to truly become an ongoing awakening being. Now, a little definition here. When I say the broken heart, I don't mean the ongoing despair and anguish and hopelessness that many of us, probably all of us to some degree, have experienced from the difficulties that life brings us. What I'm talking about is coming face to face, or we could say heart to heart, with the imperfections of life, those things that we cannot change, the existential angst of life that we have to somehow internalize and metabolize in order to become conversant with reality as it is. So our values change and we begin to see that the broken heart is a broken, open heart and allows us to have intimate contact with the world, we begin to really heal our deep psychology and the deep separateness that we all hold in our being, and that keeps us from living an awakening life, which is to say, a life that is intimate with things as they are. When we recognize that we don't need to protect ourselves from this open heart, which is open to, how can I put this? It's letting go of the magical thinking concept of some pure state where we will be fully illuminated beings and will have somehow short-circuited the suffering that all of creation goes through. As we begin to open our heart to that state, to that reality, one of the things that happens is that we become less egocentric and realize that all of creation is in the same boat. And opening to the broken heart is one way of our getting out of the dilemma of our own self-reflective egocentricity. This awakening through the broken heart as one of the avenues that we can use is the other shore. The other shore, Prajnaparamita, that we have always heard about as that land of spiritual maturity and spiritual awakening, it turns out to be here and now. Anything else that's thought of as some sort of fantasy of what the still unhealed ego that hasn't reckoned with the broken heart has as its dream of security. So the last thing I want to say is, I'll just read my last paragraph here. So don't be afraid of your broken heart. Don't be afraid of your broken heart, Jason. Don't be afraid of your broken heart, Tim. Anybody who's listening, don't be afraid of your broken heart. Let it heal you and guide you. And then in some miraculous way, a reliable and miraculous way, it heals others just by the fact that you're willing to do this piece of spiritual work. So we're not trying in the spiritual journey, we're not trying to recover from our humanity as if our humanity is an illness that we need to recover from. Instead, we're trying to recover our humanity, to bring it closer so that we can be truly human. So I hope that gives us a little to talk about. I'd like to bring Tim in. Hi, Tim.
Hi, Jason. Good to be here.
How are you today?
I'm doing fantastic. How are you doing?
I'm good. I'm good. Thank you.
You know, as I was listening to you, I couldn't help but think about all the times in my life when I had met new limitations. And I was thinking how much work it took to surrender to the new limitations. And is that kind of what you're talking about here?
You know, I think the early part of the spiritual path and the later part of the spiritual path are somewhat different. I was thinking about this morning. The early part of the spiritual path we want to achieve, right? We're someplace and we want to get someplace else. We want to achieve. That's good, I think, to be able to be motivated, to be able to want to awaken, to have the discipline, and so on and so on. But eventually, that's not the actual path. The actual path really has to do with negotiating a peace treaty. It's not a surrender to a less than optimum situation. It's a peace treaty with reality, which is all about limitations, because limitations and freedom go hand in hand. Freedom doesn't mean freedom from limitations. It means freedom with limitations, right? So, for instance, an example that I've used in the past is the elbow. The elbow has a limitation. If it didn't have a limitation, it would be broken. The freedom to move your arm and for it to be effective, to be alive, is because it has limitations. We live a certain way because we know we have the limitation of death. And we try to improve because that's at the end of things. We try to find out why we're here and what's going on. So limitation, we discover later on in the path. Earlier on, we're more gung-ho. Later on in the path, we begin to discover that freedom and limitation are hands that are intertwined. So we can't get to that unless we face limitation of one sort or another, and that's the broken heart, because we've all experienced the failure of our dreams and the disillusionment that life brings us. And those things turn out to be extraordinarily fertile and wonderful helpers. Does that kind of speak to what you just asked?
No, it sure does. It's making me think about how at times life can throw too much at us. Just it's just built in, right? I mean, at times life can throw too much at us. And is that when the heart needs to break in order to be with what's here?
Well, the heart does break. And if we don't notice it, if we are insisting that the heart remain in its old form, not being impacted by anything that's going on around it, then we have a hardened heart, don't we?
Right.
So,
and so this process of being with what's here, allowing our heart to break, that's what connects us with the rest of humanity and helps us become more of a healing presence.
Absolutely. It heals us. As we heal, we become a healing presence in the world. We don't decide to become a healing presence as if it was a separate thing from our own spiritual path. So that's exactly from my understanding, the sequence of events.
And in the beginning of the path, I imagine the unhealed ego really likes all of the new toys that they're playing with and all of the different teachings that come in. And then as we move forward along the path, it starts to change a little bit, doesn't it?
Yeah, but let's not put down the early part of the path either, because we need those new toys. We need that interest. We need that eros. It's a love affair. It's having a love affair. If you don't have eros for the person that you're attracted to, then you're not going to get further. We need that eros, even though it's not the whole thing. After eros comes love. Love is bigger than eros, includes eros, but goes further. But it has to start out with eros, and that's fine.
That makes sense to me, and I think I can find a lot of times in my life that it started out that way and it's evolved.
Sure.
You know, I'm just noticing here we have people tuning in from New York, from Oakland, Ohio, Wisconsin, Utah, even Nova Scotia, and we have at least 2 different people in the chat for whom Valentine's Day is the anniversary of a beloved's death.
Well, talk about the broken heart. Right?
Yeah. Are there any words for those who find themselves with a broken heart on a day that is all about festive love?
You know, it depends upon where in that process the person is. If it's very fresh and grief is the food of the moment, then grief is the food of the moment. And I wouldn't want to say to do anything else but grieve fully and as much as possible. At a certain point, I can imagine other coloration coming in. You know, when the heart breaks, it's very straightforward. When the heart breaks, it has become softened. When it has become softened, it brings in more bandwidth of the world. So you remember not only the grief, but you remember the good times, you remember the fun times, and you also begin to get closer to people who have gone through the same thing. So you get connected to our common lot in life.
In my experience, grief has always had that very special quality of revealing what's important in my life. And I can also understand how it can connect you to everybody else that is feeling that same kind of suffering. But I imagine each step along the path, whether it's grief or some other facet of the broken heart, it seems like its job is to be continually connecting us to others in some way. Is
I
that
agree.
true?
Yep,
Yeah.
I agree with that. Absolutely.
Yeah. So, what would you say to somebody that has a broken heart and is too consumed with it at the moment to do anything else?
I just spoke with someone this morning who's in that situation. And I would never want to tell them to do anything other than they are doing. The body, mind, and spirit, when left to its own devices, often has an innate healing ability that begins to come up. And what a person like that needs is an environment that's going to allow them to unfold all of the feelings that are in their hearts, the grief, the longing, the happiness as well, all the things that need to be unfolded. So I wouldn't give a prescription for a generalized answer for something like that.
Right. So it sounds like the more someone's able to have the space, whether that means it's an attitude of spaciousness or actually having the physical and emotional space for what they're going through, each step of the way is actually medicine for them rather than something that they need to cut out.
The problem that most people get into is that they feel they shouldn't feel a certain way. They feel they shouldn't feel the way they're feeling. That's part of the human problem. Instead of inviting it in and letting things exist and seeing where they go as they evolve, people start judging themselves, judging how they feel, projecting into the future that things will never be different than they are now. And all of that needs a more meditative and spacious approach. So if they can't give that to themselves, then getting help from somebody who can create that spaciousness for them to have their feelings is important. Mm-hmm. Now, remember, we're not only talking about the very big questions such as death and separation. The broken heart happens all the time. The broken heart happens for children when they don't get what they want or what they need. The broken heart happens for adults when disappointment happens. For me, for example, disappointment in mundane things was a very big driving force in the illumination that I needed to see the interior of my own psychology.
Can you say a little bit more about that? How does that work?
Well, I told a story in my first book, Kabbalistic Healing. I think I told this story because it's somewhat embarrassing, but I used to be really into going to, talking about this in time of COVID, by the way, when I haven't been to a movie theater in so long, seems like an alien and strange thing to even talk about. But in any case, I used to go to the movies with friends. And I would get very anxious about this. I would feel like, we have to go. It's time to go to the movies. There's going to be a line. We're not going to get in. And then people would lollygag around and they wouldn't leave when I wanted them to leave. And we'd get there and we'd come to the window and they'd say, we're sold out. And the disappointment that I would feel at that point was tremendous. Of course, it really wasn't about the movies. It was about earlier disappointments in my life and so on. But it was very important for me to face that disappointment, which felt much deeper than the actual thing should be in reality, because it was touching such a deep place in me. By opening up to that disappointment and letting myself have my heartbreak about it, I learned an enormous amount about my own psychology, and it furthered my spiritual path, becoming intimate with my own soul and the places where I was wounded and places that needed healing.
So we have a question from the silent architect, his name. What do we do when we want to feel our heartbreak to heal, but we have so much resistance to it? We find anything else to do throughout the day to avoid it.
Yeah. Of course, I would know nothing about that because I've never resisted anything in my life. What's very important at that point, at that moment, is to accept your resistance with kindness, because that's what's happening. In other words, what's happening is not some fantasy of being able to be open and accepting, but instead noticing the resistance, and which is an achievement in and of itself, by the way, because most people don't even notice what's going on with them. But when you notice that resistance or the fear or whatever happens to be happening, to accept that and give it a home in kindness is the way for it to metabolize into something else. It will change when it's loved. And it's there trying to do its best to protect you, to keep you safe. And that's all it knows how to do in its primitive way. It needs not to be attacked. It needs not to be forced and pushed. But one does want to be aware and awake to it. You know, part of an awakening life or an awakened life is not mystical. It literally means being aware and being awake to the deepest parts of isness, of who you are in that moment. So my experience is when I find those things in myself, I get into trouble if I try to change it immediately or force it into some other pattern or shape. Instead, beginning to feel it and accept it and let it be there with kindness is the most healthy thing we can do.
That is the challenge, right? Just to be able to be awake to the histories that are in the present moment of how we judge one thing is allowed and another is not allowed. And we miss the fact that what's right here in front of us is usually where the nourishment is. And if we can be conscious enough to that, the love then becomes just allowing it to be. And isn't there a sort of alchemy that takes place in the body at this point? If you
we have a little chant we sing sometimes. You probably know this one. It goes, everything that is allowed to exist exists in light. Everything that is allowed to exist exists in light. That's an alchemical chant. That's what happens. That transmutation begins with love and acceptance. Of loving that resistant part of you does not mean, well, you can remain that way for the rest of your being. It means that it's loved. And as I said, anything that's loved is getting the proper nourishment for growth.
And including the resistance to feeling the love, to being with it. It's whatever's here.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Absolutely. That's the ground level entry into beginning to live a life of contact.
Yeah. And I'm even just feeling it in my heart as we talk about this, how difficult it can be to do something like that, and how the heart has to break in order to have some kind of more space than it could have prior to this occasion.
Exactly.
Yeah. So, okay, some more questions coming in. So, is it wise to help teens or young people deal with disappointments? Or do they need to go through the path and learn to strive without our hand holding?
Well, I'm getting two different things. Maybe the person who's asking the question can clarify. Does hand holding mean that you're trying to erase the disappointment so that the teen doesn't feel the disappointment? Or does hand holding mean, hey, I'm with you, I'm with you in your disappointment? They're two different things. Maybe they can clarify.
Well, let's say, for example, the hand holding is the parent or guardian that's able to be with the grief that they're going through, for example. Is that something that's preferred, or is it up to the teen to sort of push through it in some way or figure it out on their own?
Having a companion along this path of healing is always important. And if the parent and or guardian, whomever, and this particular young person have that kind of relationship, that's always better, of course. Haven't you been isolated in your youth?
Absolutely.
I was isolated in my youth. Now, I didn't have the type of environment that invited that kind of intimacy of feelings, but I know families where that is true. And it's a wonderful thing.
Another question coming in.
Yeah,
Question from Mark. Can you speak to self-forgiveness and the opening of the heart?
sure.
It's a big one.
Well, it sounds like Mark actually knows the answer to this already, but as long as I've been on a spiritual path, which is a long time, when I run into trouble, it's happened because I have not forgiven myself for being who I am in that particular moment. Forgiveness is something that maybe comes easy to some people. It certainly did not come easy to me, and it's something that needs to be practiced. But it is the elixir of spiritual attainment. I mean, after all, who do we think we are that we shouldn't need forgiveness? It's filled with a multitude of problems if we think that. It means that we think we should be better than we are, which is a prideful, non-reality stance. It also means that we're not giving ourselves an inch, that there's no warmth or anything. So forgiveness is something that needs to be cultivated. Again, forgiveness is not license. Just go ahead and be the same as you have always been. It's really opening up to, it's exactly what Mark said. It's opening the heart. And I'd like to know Mark's experience about that. When Mark does that for himself and his heart opens, what happens?
Well, maybe we'll see if Mark can comment, and I'll bring it in when he does.
Yeah.
Another question from Jolanda. How do we deal with outside influences that constantly seem to try and not let us heal? It's an interesting one.
Yeah. So negative influences, depends what stage of life you're at. If you're a kid and it's not just normal, healthy rebellion, and it's actually negative stuff, you don't have lots of choices at that point. But if you are on a path and you're older than that, you're an adult or a young adult, then I don't know, you start creating your reality so that you can follow your path more and more clearly. I'd have to know more details and know, what was being asked, but people encounter this type of thing all the time. Misunderstood by society, by other people, by relatives and family members. And at the same time, we all need a trusted advisor, right? We can't figure everything out on our own. Sometimes we don't know when we're in delusion. So getting a teacher or a mentor or a coach is very important to help us focus on reality and not on our delusions.
Mm-hmm. So there's a clarification earlier from Deanna about teens and broken hearts.
Yes.
And it's more of a question. Right? She was asking of how can we be with our teenagers and how can we support our young people in being with their own broken hearts?
Oh, well, that clarification makes this question easy to answer, which is you have to deal with your own broken heart. You have to be, the more you are on the path, the more you are walking the walk. Kids know when someone is truthful. They have a great radar. It's fantastic. And when you are really walking the path, when you know what it's like to have a broken heart and to have found it useful and healing to relate directly to the broken heart, right? Then the child you're working with is going to know that too. And that's the most honest and authentic type of help you can give them. If it's just out of a book or it's a good idea or it's rote, it's not going to have the same impact and authenticity.
As you're speaking, I'm wondering, what made you decide to choose this topic today?
I have a general, it's quite a question, Tim. I have a general thing that I've been thinking about. The spiritual path is so often presented as this glamorous thing filled with mystical swords and bolts of lightning and sudden awakenings and head over heels love and so on and so on. All of those things are good. They all happen. There are head over heels love, meeting the creator. There are peak experiences. There are all sorts of people. I'm very interested in the rest of us. I'm very interested in people like myself who are more of the common ilk, so to speak, who go through the type of suffering that most people go through. In a sense, I'm trying to demystify and de-glamorize the spiritual path so that the people who go through it can end up experiencing what it's like to be fully human, accepting the totality of their being with their beauty, their courage, their selfishness, their smallness, their greatness, all the possible shades and colors of what it means to be a human being. So concepts like the broken heart being an ally and not something that should be avoided is something that's always in my mind. Suffering is the same thing. The spiritual path, when it is followed the way I think it is most beneficial, is counterintuitive. We walk toward our suffering, into our suffering, not to become, what's the word, Tim? Not to be in a morass of suffering, but to see what's there, what it's made of. It illuminates the best parts of us. We could say, if people know the word bodhisattva, we could say that our suffering is the mother of our bodhisattva. The suffering is the mother of the bodhisattva, our own bodhisattva. It illuminates who we think we are, the concepts and ideas and beliefs that are standing in the way of our vast possibility. So I chose this topic, as I choose many of them, because I'm really interested in bringing the spiritual path down to earth, to not make it only for the chosen few on the top of the mountain peak, but to make it a useful, practical way to live where the true joy of being alive can envelop us.
It sounds like the true joy doesn't really have an opposite at that point. It's all inclusive.
Well, joy that is opposed to suffering has an opposite. Joy that, or let's put it this way, happiness that is opposed to suffering has an opposite. Joy, in the way I'm using it, which is in a non-dual way, includes the totality of human life, all of life, not just human life, all sentient beings.
When you talk about suffering being the mother of the bodhisattva, I'm thinking about the times in my life when my heart has been broken.
Mm-hmm.
Thinking in particular, my mind keeps going to a time when I was just starting to really get going with my own healing practice. And I had a mystery illness, something you and I share. It's not a perfect one-to-one thing, but we both know what it's like to be sick for a long time with no diagnoses. And as I'm thinking about this, there was this moment when I was meeting a part of me that really wanted to be there for my clients. I really wanted to be a good healer, and I wanted to help them. And at the same time, while this was happening, my health was declining so rapidly. And in this desperate attempt to be what I needed to be for my clients, I would drink coffee or caffeinated teas. I was trying to do anything I could. But this one day I realized I was too sick to do this. There was just no way that I was going to be able to abuse my body in that way or in another, anyway. So my heart broke in that moment when I realized my predicament. I simply couldn't be what I wanted to be for the people I loved and who needed something from me.
Mm-hmm.
And I'll always remember that moment, because the compassion that came forward for myself was so unexpected and it was so real. And I still drink the milk from that experience to today. It even makes me emotional to talk about it. And I carry that suffering with me, or that realization. I carry that experience with me with every client that I see. So, is that the kind of broken heart that you're talking about?
So when someone comes into your healing room, is it your uh, sweet personality that heals them? Well, no, let you, that does heal them. Let's try something else. Is it your knowledge that heals them? Well, maybe a little bit. Knowledge we gain by studying and learning. Is it your insight? We learn that too, and that helps as well. But I suspect that what really aids people when they come into your healing room, beside all the technical expertise that you have and the insight that you have, is your own path, which has brought compassion and presence to you. So when you have that compassion and presence, and people walk into your compassion and presence, it's transmitted. That's the thing that actually heals. We spend a long time, many years, thinking it's something else that's doing the healing. The expertise helps, the knowledge helps, the long experience and insight helps, but there's something else. That something else is the type of thing that is only planted, fertilized, and grows from something like the broken heart, which is not the only way we do our work. I'm not saying that we have to walk around in the broken heart every minute. I was just adding the broken heart specifically today because it's Valentine's Day, and Valentine's Day in its commercial incarnation is only about the whole heart and the better heart and the joined heart and so on, all of which is wonderful, fantastic. But there are a lot of people out there today who have broken hearts. Are they lost, or are they at the brink of finding something wonderful if they can hold that close to them physically and emotionally and metaphorically? You get
So,
that, right?
yeah, I do. And so, to the extent that we as human beings, imperfect beings, that, not an idealized way, but to the extent that we can meet this brokenheartedness, is that the extent that we can be a healing presence in the world?
It's one of the ways.
Hmm.
There's lots of ways, there's lots of paths for this. But, to know you have a broken heart is to come down off of some high horse of attainment, right? It's kind of like, it's not coming in and saying, the Holy One will now help you. That doesn't really work.
Hmm.
It's coming in and saying, the human one is with you. And I have some technical expertise as well that's going to help our insight and our healing in that way. But it's about being joined, being connected. The two great paradigms of our universe are separateness and connectedness, both of which co-arise together. They're mutually co-arising things. Separateness needs oneness to exist. Oneness needs separateness. The broken heart is both personal and transcendent. So our personal self, when working with the broken, open heart in that way, gets a taste of the transcendent as well. It's those things together that makes somebody a healing presence, an awakening being, and not in some attenuated, etheric, specialized, rarefied way. It's kind of like a Jewish awakened person, like a mensch.
Got another question for you, Jason.
Good.
Any words for people going through a breakup during this season of romance?
No, I'm sorry that they are. I'm sorry that they are. That must be very lonely and very hard on a day like this. Yeah, I remember those days. Well, I guess that's my word. I'm very sorry that that's happened to you. And as it was for me, with the times that I broke up, it was all for the best because things got better the next time around.
And I'm thinking about the evolution of your thinking about a broken heart.
Mm.
I imagine you had several examples of times when your thinking must have changed as your heart broke on the path. And I'm curious if there's anything that you'd like to share, any story, personal story or otherwise.
I can't think of one right now or a particular story. I really can't. But what is most up for me that I can remember is that, let's use disappointment. Coming into contact with disappointment for me was like a searchlight that illuminated parts of myself that I didn't know. Resistance, resistance to life, resistance to letting go of my idealized version of what life should be and who I should be, as opposed to who I was and am. So, what I remember as a kind of feeling tone from my own experience is the more I embraced whatever was happening to me, the more illumination I got about who I was. And therefore, all of that, even the difficult parts and the imperfect parts of myself, became workable situations and became things that did not stand in the way of my life force and my enjoyment of life. It's not that they disappeared, but they became things that I lived with and could relate to and became allies, actually. They became allies, trustworthy allies, because they always told the truth.
How can people how can people that are just being introduced to this non-dual way of thinking, how can they be with the broken heart in this way? A way that's helpful and nourishing and allows it all to have a place.
Well, I don't know how many people are listening to this stream right now, but something drew them to this moment of conversation between you and me. And people need to learn to trust that impulse in themselves and follow and seek out like-minded people and teachers and groups of people and places where they can study. Because this is not the kind of thing that 99% of humanity can do alone. It's something that is really best done in tandem with another person, with other groups, and with teachers who can lead the way for them. A teacher is really there to remind people of something that's true. There are technical levels of teaching where somebody teaches you a new technique or a new meditation or whatever, but really the teacher is there to remind you and to sometimes put words to something so that you can go further, and to remind you also that you have what you need within you and someone also who has faith in you. So that would be my suggestion. Find someone who has faith in you, who's been doing it themselves, and who can thereby take you further.
So we got about 60 plus people watching the stream right now, Jason. Any Any words of advice for them right now? Anything coming to mind?
No.
I'm just waiting for some more questions to pop up if anyone has them.
Okay.
Yeah.
Where are these people from?
Oh, we had said earlier they're kind of from all over. So we've got people tuning in from New York, Oakland, Ohio, Wisconsin, Utah, Nova Scotia, New Jersey. So we've got a good group here.
Utah. I haven't been to Utah in years.
I was just there a few years ago.
You were skiing?
Yeah. No, I'm not skiing. I was there during the summer months.
Nice.
Yeah. Well, is there anything else hanging out in your mind that, in terms of, being a beginner, intermediate, or advanced person on the path, as to how they can better themselves during this time of year, whether it's from a broken heart or they're coming to terms with some disappointment? And I'm thinking about specifically a line that you had in your book, Non-Dual Kabbalistic Healing, where it says, it starts in disappointment and ends in light.
Wow. I'm going to get a copy of that book. Hold on. That was the coda to that book. They were at the very end, wasn't it?
I think so.
Yeah. It starts with a disappointment and ends in light. It starts with a disappointment that is so completely shocking that the waves it makes as it lands continues to the present day. We land on earth, created in an exquisite manner, our eyes ready to look, to be so completely touched and touching that light, skin, air, and earth are the same thing. We cannot believe that things have fallen apart so quickly, and we find ourselves with no words to grasp this reality, so it becomes ungraspable and strangles us just when we are expecting great things. That's just the kind of heading on this little piece. So you just reminded me that I've been thinking about this for so many years, because this was published back in the 90s. And it does end in light. I would have to say that in reviewing my own life, some of which has been quite difficult, that there is an overriding sense of illumination. And that this illumination, this effulgence, includes all of the suffering, includes the disappointment. And I literally see those as my companions. So I guess the practice of enormous self-forgiveness and kindness toward our limitations is an enormous prerequisite. It's both the prerequisite and the end product of our spiritual search. It comes full circle. All the stuff in the middle is fantastically interesting. Insights into the universe, understanding consciousness in its myriad forms, understanding mystical powers, understanding all of that is fantastic. But that's just the middle of the path. The real endpoint of the path is love. Is really having the capacity to hold our metaphorical hands wide enough to include all of our broken pieces. And something happens when we do that. When we do that, we turn out not to be holding broken pieces, but pieces of light. And it's really true. It's a how do you say it? Transmogrification, a transmutation, an alchemical process, as you said before. So that's what I wish for everybody who's listening. I wish that for everybody's path, that they have the opportunity, that life presents them with the opportunity to find someone to help them, or to get some help from our talk together, to read the right books, to meet the right people, to have faith in themselves, so that they can allow all of these pieces enough nourishment so that they can turn to light. Or better than that, I just want to correct myself, they can reveal that they were always light. Yeah.
It's that leads into a good, we have a few more questions here and we have the time. So Tove on YouTube and Andrew on Facebook, they're both asking for advice about finding hope when pain, grief, and hopelessness feel unbearable.
You know, I don't know their situations, so it's a little facile for me to say anything about this, but I'll say something as tenderly as I can. I'm going to assume, for the purpose of this answer, that those two people who are separately asking the same question, is that right, Tim?
Yes.
That they're experiencing this right now, that they're experiencing this unbearable suffering right now. If that's true, then there's somebody there who is able to experience it. Do you know what I mean? If it was unbearable, they wouldn't even be here. They wouldn't be cogent. They wouldn't be cohesive enough to ask this question. So I would look to that part that even in this tremendous duress that they may be experiencing, is still has a center and a point of view, and is still present, experiencing this suffering. That part needs to be, who is that, is the question that I would ask. Who is that one who, despite this forest of fears and forest of difficulty, is able to stand there in the middle of that fire, to mix metaphors for a minute? That would be something that if I was there with them in person, I would want to find out what their thoughts were about that. That's what I can say about that question.
What is knowing who they are, the one that can feel something that's unbearable? And from what I heard, sounds like it's not quite unbearable because they're still here. So there's a certain edge.
It certainly, I'm not minimizing it. It certainly feels unbearable. I get that. There are people who are suffering things that I can't even imagine. But there's still somebody there. I'd like to know who that person is, because that person seems to have a resource that this person could use at that moment, if they paid attention to that other person as well.
Okay, I hear you.
Yeah.
So we have a question from Ellen. She asks, what do you do with a broken heart caused by someone that you mentored?
I'm not sure I understand the question. If someone that you mentored broke your heart, then your heart is broken. And you do the same thing with any broken heart. First of all, again, I'm not attempting in anything that we've said here today to mitigate or try to erase the pain that people go through from a broken heart. I'm talking about something a little bit different. I'm not talking about the anguish, as I said before, the despair, the acute stage of having your heart broken. I'm talking about the general attitude that the broken heart should be rejected, immediately mended, that it's worthless, as compared to the whole strong heart that marches into the future intact, which doesn't happen for anybody, by the way. So I'm talking about, I'm not talking about using some sort of mystical or spiritual means to suffer less right away as we're going through this. I'm talking about cultivating an attitude that the disappointments and limitations in life that break our heart should not be avoided. They can be brought closer rather than pushed away, and that there's a gift when they're brought closer, even if they're unresolvable. Again, I don't know this person's situation, but I just want to clarify that that's what I mean by working with a broken heart. Otherwise, we're trying to do some materialistic magic. You know, here's a little mantra you can say with your broken heart, and now you feel okay because you're depersonalized in some way. That's not in no interest to me. So people will suffer. This is about not the acute stage of suffering, but the general awakening attitude toward working with our suffering.
And so one final question here. Hopefully we have the time. It's a question from Jolanda. It's for both of us, if we're willing to share. Can you maybe elaborate on your mysterious illness and how it fit into your spiritual development?
Well, I can do that very quickly for myself. I don't mind. In 1978 or so, I got very sick with a mysterious illness, and my illness lasted 7 years, some of which was practically bedridden, and so on. We eventually found out what it was, although it wasn't treated properly. But what that illness did for me was take somebody who had a very deep spiritual inclination, which I've had since I was 4 years old. Earliest memories were things like that for me, but who was, because of his own genome and characterology and the type of suffering I went through in my early family, was extremely defended and resistant to life, while being just as interested in letting go of that if I possibly could, but couldn't find a way. What the illness did was to wear me down. I'm a hefty guy. I weighed 122 pounds when I was that ill. I was thin like a rail, and along with thinness was the thinness of my defenses. I began seeing things that I couldn't possibly have seen when my body and my unhealed ego were as strong as they were. So it was an extremely, it was a lot of suffering. It's Jolanda, right, who asked the question?
Right.
Jolanda, I don't recommend it, but if it happens to you, it's going to teach you something profound.
And I'll say, for me, briefly, as we end our live stream today, for me, it wore me down as well, many years. And it brought me to places within myself I never otherwise would have gone. And it taught me kindness and compassion in ways that I don't think I ever would have found if it wasn't for this experience. And it taught me how to take care of myself, actually, how to love myself.
Yeah.
And so
there you go. There you go. So let me say one last thing then. We're going to be ending, right, Tim, first of all? Okay.
Yes.
So first of all, I hope people will come and visit the foundation website. It's non-duality, NONDUALITY.US.com. And there are other discussions there and other teachings. And also there's a way to donate to our not-for-profit so that we can do things like this, which I hope people will do. Also, Tim, you're going to be running a discussion group, right?
Yes, this Saturday, 11 a.m.
It's
Eastern.
free. It's free.
Yep.
And was that, I think that the sign up for that was already sent out, right? Uh, right? Am I correct about that?
I don't know.
Yeah, I think so. I think well, we have two people behind the scenes, Julie Coriel and Jared Drake. Maybe Julie can a link for the discussion group. Will she says? What does she say there, Tim?
It will be emailed out tomorrow.
Tomorrow. Okay,
Yeah.
great. So check your mailboxes. There's a free discussion group that Tim, my marvelous friend, is going to be leading, and people will get a lot of time to discuss some of the ideas that came up in our discussion today. So listen, thank you all for being attentive and being here and asking your questions. And I look forward to seeing you again next month. Okay, and thank you, Tim.
Thanks, Jason. Good to be here.
All my love to you. Bye-bye.